Welcome back to the podcast. If you're new here, my name is Gracesandra, and if you notice, we have a new name. So the name of the podcast now is Out Here Trying to Survive, which is the same as my YouTube channel, which is the same as my TikTok handle. It's the same as one of my Instagram accounts. The name of this podcast used to be Aging Gracefully. I know I need to change the intro still, but I realized that in my desire to talk about aging and really figure out what it means as a Black or brown woman of color to age in a way that really leans into it in a society that is increasingly ageist, I realized that I want to stay with the theme of what interests me in terms of just helping Black and brown women of color survive just in general. So that doesn't mean I'm not going to be talking about aging for those of you who are coming along, because I have started talking about my perimenopause journey. I've talked about dating after divorce. I've talked about like dating at this age, which is, kind of a trash heap if we're going to keep it real. So I'm still going to be delving into some of the issues that have to deal with being a Black and brown woman of color aging, but it's also going to be about all the other stuff we have to survive too that's not necessarily aging. So that's why I changed the name. So if you're new here, welcome to the Out Here Trying to Survive podcast. I'm glad you're listening. Thank you so much. So today's episode is going to be broken up into 3 segments, and the first segment is going to be about things that I wish I had known or been educated about before I got into a second marriage, and specifically before I got into a narcissistically abusive marriage. My story is that I had been married before for almost 15 years, and I rushed into another marriage. And the reason why, in part, is because I was being love bombed by a narcissist who kind of rushed the process forward, and that's very typical of narcissists. And today I did a live stream actually up on my YouTube channel about the red flags that I wish I had noticed before or while I was in a relationship with him. And I realized that a part of what I was talking about, a lot of what I was talking about were just things I didn't know because I didn't know, and things I wasn't doing, healing I didn't have. And so that's the perspective that I want to come at for this first segment is, what are some things that can protect you from being in a narcissistically abusive relationship that are just already there before you even meet a person who could potentially be toxic or narcissistic or a sociopath or a psychopath? The first thing is knowing exactly what you want. A lot of people who are like into law of attraction talk about this whole thing of like, write down what you want, be specific about what you want so you can get it. But you know what, y'all, just write down what you want so that you don't know what you don't want. It ain't even about manifesting. It ain't even about anything other than knowing exactly what you want and don't want. And some people may call this boundaries. Yeah, it is boundaries, but there's also just desires. Part of it is boundaries, but part of it is like you just have a desire for, like, for example, if you're someone, so now I'm someone who I really enjoy being outside now. This has not been most of my life, FYI. Most of my life, I have been wanting to be on the inside, even though I grew up playing outside. Something happened in the middle of my life where I was like, I just want to be indoors. But now I just want to be outside as much as possible. I want to be swimming. I want to be in lakes. I want to be in oceans. I want to be among trees. I want to be climbing mountains. I want to be hiking. I want to be cave splunking. I mean, y'all, I just want to be out here. I want to be out here in these streets, y'all, particularly nature. But, I like going out too. But anyway, that's a desire of mine. So that's something I would put on a list right now. I think it actually is on the list, like must be outdoorsy, basically. For any guy that I date or look forward to dating, he just has to be outdoorsy. He got to want to be outside with me. It just gives me so much life. So I just get the feeling sometimes for some people, it feels like it's just not useful to do something like that. But I did not have a list like that before I got into a second marriage. I just kind of thought like, oh, off the top of my head, I'll know what I want and I'll know what I don't want. But there are ways that can protect you from toxic people. So let me give you an example. There's a dating coach I heard once. I forgot what his last name is. I will tag him in the show notes. His stuff has really helped me. His name is Mark. I think he's a white dude. But anyway, he said something about how when he was dating, he knew that he wanted, what did he say? I forgot the exact thing that he said, but basically, let's say he said something like he wanted a woman who was really into politics. I forgot what the exact thing that was his specific thing, but he had something like that. Like, let's just say it was politics. He wanted a woman who was really into politics, and he was dating a woman and everything was going really well. There was no red flags. He said they were like really enjoying each other. And then when that conversation piece came up after a little while, I think he said like 3 months, 4 months, he talked about how he wanted to do a lot more with politics. And she kind of stated that she was really uncomfortable with it. She didn't really like politics. She didn't really want to go there. Then he said, that's something that I want for me. I would really like to be able to have conversations with my partner about politics. It's just really important to me. So she kind of backpedaled and was like, well, actually, I mean, I can get into it. Like, I can start learning it. I can do the things you want so that I can meet this need for you. And that alone is what showed him that he was ready to move on from her just because she was willing to try to change herself to accommodate him and what he wanted. And he knew that, first of all, that's not going to be genuine. Second of all, that's not going to last. But third of all, it was just a way that he was able to protect himself, because that in and of itself really is a bad boundary that she wanted to like fold into who he was. And she was ready to change as a result so that she could keep him. I thought that was such a great example. And he was talking about, this is why you need to have your own list in your own mind of what do you really want. And there are things that it's okay just to say, I don't want you so-and-so because you don't have this thing, even though it might be a neutral thing. Like for me, this getting outside thing, I just would never want to be partnered with someone who always wants to be holed up, who doesn't ever want to go outside and have adventures with me. Like it just ain't gonna work, bro. And I don't want you to try to change for me. If that ain't already in you, it's not gonna work for us. I think one of the things that would have been really helpful for me in hindsight is if before I had gotten with him, I had a very concrete list. But also, here's another thing, y'all. If you haven't really spent a lot of time with yourself, if you really haven't, if you've been in a marriage this whole time, or you've been raising kids for 20 years and you haven't had a chance to even think about, what do I like? What do I want to watch? What are my hobbies? What do I enjoy? That's even a step before being able to create a list like that. Like the reason why I can know that about myself now is because I've taken a lot of time in the last probably 3 or 4 years to really figure out, what do I like about being outside so much and why it gives me so much joy and peace and hope, and what aspects do I like and what different environments do I like, and realizing how much I really like hiking and being out in the wilderness, which is not something I ever liked at any point before in my life. But I spend a lot of time when I was by myself doing things like that. And when I'm by myself, because I only have my kids 50-50 custody, I spend time getting to know myself and realizing this is something that I know it has to be part of his passion too. Another thing that will protect you from getting with a toxic or narcissistic person or a psychopath or a sociopath is emotional intelligence. That both having your own, understanding what emotional intelligence is, and then looking for that in the partner. A lot of times toxic and narcissistic people, but especially narcissists, will not show emotional intelligence right away. They'll actually show just how immature they are through love bombing, which is this excessive use of compliments, money, gifts, time, communication, text, whatever they can do to overwhelm your senses with affection and attention. And that is not a sign of emotional intelligence at all. But in the beginning, it feels so good, especially when you're potentially very desperate for love, touch, and affection. It feels so good. So it's really easy to be kind of bombarded and overwhelmed with that. But if you have a sense of what emotional intelligence is and how it looks like in a man who's pursuing you, who really is a good person, then you get a sense of how off that feels. So now when a man tries to love bomb me, which I think the last time I had that happen, like really directly, where I was like, oh my God, this person is really trying to love bomb, like very intentionally. It was just last February. And for about a day, for about 24 hours, I could feel myself falling for it and kind of getting sucked into it. And then I was like, this is a love bomb. Like, oh my gosh, this is a love bomb. Like, he is really trying to love bomb me. But the great thing is it took me 24 hours. But before I met my narcissistically abusive ex, I just didn't know at all. He was just love bombing and I had no clue. He was telling me within a week that I was the most beautiful, amazing woman he'd ever met, that he'd never met anything like me, that I was so different from all the other women, that I was going to be his black Nubian queen princess, and that he was going to take care of me for the rest of my life, me and my kids, and we were going to get married, and all within like 2 weeks. And that is not emotional intelligence. But the fact that I didn't know that is also not emotional intelligence. And I think what I was talking about today on my live stream was that a lot of times people get into relationships with toxic men, in particular women, get into relationships with toxic men because we just don't know what we don't know. So yeah, we don't want to ever blame the victim. You should not have to be Inspector Gadget. You should not have to have FBI level skills to get into a relationship. Like, that's not normal. And yes, in a perfect world, we would all be able to figure out like, oh my gosh, this person is love bombing me. This person is a toxic person. This is a narcissist. But a lot of times we're not going to know, but there are things that we can do to protect ourselves. So one is creating that list, knowing who you are, knowing what you want, knowing very specifically what you want, and being very resolute that you are not going to let someone talk you out of that or talk you into it. Don't let someone talk you into what you want or don't want, and don't let someone talk you out of it. That's really, really important. And then also having a sense of emotional intelligence, both your own and theirs. And there's some books, there's actually a book called, I think it's called Emotional Intelligence 1.0 or 2.0 or something like that. And I can't tell you that I read it. I remember looking at it. Actually, I bought it at a Barnes & Nobles for $5 and I skimmed it. So I have a general idea, and I had already kind of had a general idea of it just because of the work I was doing at the time, but it might be worth it to just Google it. Just Google emotional intelligence, just get a basic sense of what that would look like, especially in a dating scenario, because once you do, the sad thing is, here's the sad thing, the sad thing is once, once you get a sense of what emotional intelligence is, it is really easy to see that a lot of the men that you might interact with, for me on dating apps, because that's like the primary way that I meet men in general when I'm out or just trying to date, just because I'm not like out at bars and stuff, like to be able to meet people organically. I just don't have a lot of points of connection to meet men organically. So I've been meeting men on dating apps. And the thing is that you'll find pretty quickly that a lot of men don't have emotional intelligence. And it's astonishing. And I know men would say the same thing, that there a lot of women on these apps don't have emotional intelligence either. That's probably true. Probably the overall percentage of people who really have figured out how to intelligently communicate with people is pretty low. But I would say if you're someone who is listening to this podcast and already wanting to grow and heal and become a better person, you have a modicum of emotional intelligence and you deserve someone who can give that back to you. You really do. Not only that, but having it will protect you from people who you can see right away are not that. Another thing that you can do to protect yourself from a narcissistic relationship is tell them no. And this is something that a friend of mine who was a narc abuse survivor taught me, that she was like, this is a great way that I test out guys. At first I thought like test, but this is a great way to sift. Think of it as a sifting process. But when they ask for your phone number, say no. Like, oh, actually, can we just use Facebook Messenger or something like that? Or first date, say, I'm not available that time, maybe next week, or I'm not sure when, just something that can create even the tiny amount of friction or a tiny amount of he's not getting his way, and see how he responds to that. Typically, men who are healthy and have good motives and intentions for you, they're just patient and kind. Think about how you would be. Like if I asked a guy for his phone number and he said no, I would probably be like, oh, okay, dang, I feel dumb. I might say something like that, like, oh my God, I just asked and you said no. I'd probably try to make light of it. I'd probably try to make a joke, because if I ask a guy for his phone number, my intentions are good. My intentions are pure. I'm truly interested in him. If I ask a guy for his phone number, even more, just because I don't usually do that. I don't think I've done that ever, maybe. maybe not since high school. I don't know, maybe college. But someone who is toxic and or narcissistic, they usually show right away, right then. If you said no, they usually have either some kind of little funky ass attitude problem, or even they might make a joke that has like a funky attitude problem with undertones of it, or they might just all like flat out show their anger or show their frustration. And right then that is a red flag. It's a nice subtle thing. It's a nice, safe, subtle way to try to sift out some of the men who might be in any way toxic or narcissistic. Another way to protect yourself from getting into a relationship with a toxic or narcissistic person is to have your own boundaries. Of course, boundaries are so important in any relationship. They're so important at our age, with our parents, with our siblings. They're so important with our kids and helping them learn boundaries. So boundaries is just important, period. But this is one area of my life that I have struggled with. So I do want to say that up front. This is not an area where I'm saying like, oh, yep, I have this completely down. I got this in the bag. Y'all just have y'all boundaries and y'all got to figure it out, right? Because this is so easy to do. No, it's not easy to do. And if you are someone whose boundaries were constantly violated as a child, it's really hard skill not to relearn, but to learn the first time, even though I've been trying to for so many years. I've been trying to for so many years to have better boundaries, and it's just really hard to revert back. But if you're cultivating a sense of boundaries, one thing I have learned over time of dating, since being out of a narcissistically abusive marriage is that the more vocal I am with exercising these boundaries, the more it grows, the more empowered I feel, the more I feel strengthened. For example, there was a time where me creating boundaries, especially after my narcissistically abusive marriage, like my sense of myself, my sense of my power, it was just dead. My self-esteem was dead. It was like my arm strength was dead. My brain was dead. My heart was, it was just everything. I just felt weak. And so in dating, it just really took a lot of strength for me to get back to just trying to articulate boundaries and have a sense of what do I want? What do I need? And as I've done that, now I can see the muscles getting stronger. It's getting stronger. So that's just a kind of encouragement for those of you who are struggling with boundaries with certain people, with certain areas, with certain things. The muscle will get stronger. You just have to keep practicing it. Sometimes these low stakes dating relationships are a great place to practice boundaries, are a great place to practice speaking your mind, are a great place to say, nope, this is my boundary and I'm sticking to it. So for example, before I got into a narcissistically abusive marriage, I really didn't have a strong sense of boundaries at all. Yeah, not at all. I did with some women in my life. I did with my kids. I was growing that with my family, with some toxic family members, but that was hard. But I definitely didn't in dating. And so when my ex, like, for example, gave me a deadline, like I want to get married by, for example, April 24th, it was really, really hard for me to say, no, my boundary is, because he pushed back a little bit. And I said, no, my boundary is August. We have to wait until August. I really want that time. I want the summer. And the reason why it was a boundary for me is because I was still in the process of divorcing my ex and I wanted that to be completely just final and done with. And I wanted some time to pass. And that was one way where I did not let myself get kind of like talked into doing something I didn't want to do, which I did not want to get married that soon. Another example of having a boundary is just deciding what your time frame is just in general, not just for marriage, but just in general. I have a friend who says her boundary is 6 months. Like she will not get into a relationship, a committed relationship with someone until she's known them for 6 months. And I think that's a great boundary. Mine is a little shorter. Mine is 3 months, just because 6 months to me feels like a little bit too long. But but for example, we're different. That's fine. So mine is 3 months, hers is 6 months. But either way, that time frame protects me. Now, if I had that time frame with my ex, because he was trying to rush us into a relationship so fast, I mean, we became a couple. This is so funny. We became a couple on our first date. We decided to commit to one another on our first date. If that ain't the biggest red flag in life, y'all. In life, like we had just met in person for the first time and he was like, do you want to be my girlfriend? I want to lock you down. I don't want you with nobody else. I don't want you dating nobody else, seeing nobody else, sleeping with nobody else. Like, it's you and me. That should have been a red flag. But for some reason, but like I said, y'all, back then I didn't know what I didn't know. And I just thought, oh, it's so sweet. It's so sweet that he wants to be in a relationship with me so soon. So now if I had the boundary of 3 months that I would not get into a committed relationship, if back then I had that boundary, do y'all know by the time 3 months was over, I probably wouldn't even have moved forward with him because I would have known enough about him. I would have known enough about how he handles anger. I would have known enough about some of the ways that he was really toxic already. And if I had a boundary that said, I won't marry someone. So now my boundary is I will not marry again unless I really don't even want the institution of marriage. I really would have rather have like a lifetime partnership commitment ceremony. But let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I meet someone wonderful, just wonderful, and we plan on getting married. My boundary is right now, we will not step across that line until we have been a committed, happy, healthy, amazing couple for 2 years. 2 years, y'all, 2 years. Because what happened was with my ex, and this is just in general will protect you from toxic, narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic people. They cannot go that long without letting their mask fall. A lot of people after a year, if they're a very toxic, narcissistic, sociopathic, or psychopathic person, cannot go longer than a year without showing that. But by the time a year had went by that I knew my ex, I had already married him. I was already pregnant with his child, and he had already started devaluing me. By the time 12 months went by of us knowing each other, I was already feeling quite miserable. I would have never married him and never got locked into that, never had went through so much trauma if I had created for myself a boundary about time frames that I honored, a boundary about what that would look like, a boundary about when I'm willing or not willing to sleep with the person. All of that stuff I have in place now to protect me. But I did not have that stuff in place then. And Lord have mercy. Y'all. Lord have mercy. What I could have protected myself from if I had just had some boundaries. The next way that you can protect yourself from a narcissistic or very toxic person is having a sense of self that is not rooted in ego, but that's rooted in reality and radical acceptance. So, for example, if somebody tells you, for example, like I said, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met in the world and all of this stuff right away. You know, if I had back then thought about it, is it really possible that I'm the most beautiful woman he had ever met, ever in life, and that he was so madly deep in love with me in a week? The thing is now I know, as wonderful as I am, as wonderful as I may be, y'all, no one can know within a week that they want to spend the rest of their life with me. Yes, I know some of you might be like, well, my parents, and we all know somebody who fell in love with somebody within a week or something like that, and they're still together 30 years later. But we know that that's an anomaly. We know that those scenarios are an anomaly. More often than not, healthy relationships require time. They require foundational building blocks of trust being built over time. Most people, half the people don't even have successful marriages in general. But do you know how much the chance of having a long lasting marriage reduces, the percentage it produces when it's a second marriage? It like plunges down. Like I think it's like 65% success rate for like normal marriages. First marriages, it's like 65% or so. But like once you're in your second marriage, it goes down to 30% or something likelihood that you'll stay married. And then once it's your third marriage, it's like 20 or 15% likelihood that you'll stay married. I mean, and then once you're on your fourth marriage, there's like almost no percentage. I don't know the exact stats, but I remember looking at that and thinking like, dang, the more times you're married, the less likely you are to get it right. Actually, drastically less likely you are to actually meet and stay with a partner long-term after that. And I knew going into my second marriage, I did know that already actually. And I knew that it was my second marriage. I thought it was his second marriage too, but it was actually his third. And so the likelihood of us actually being able to stay together anyway was pretty low anyway, considering we were on like our fifth combined marriage. I mean, if you add his three, including me, and my two, including him. But my whole point is that don't believe the hype. It's really, really easy to get caught up in love bombing. But if you have a sense of self, that I could have even said like, well, in a normal, healthy relationship going at a healthy rate, you're getting to know things about each other that could become problems down the line. For example, something that he didn't like about me down the line and something that I didn't like about him was actually, speaking of, our political views became increasingly opposing. And that's something we were already married before we had a whole lot of talks about it. Now, in my defense, he did make it seem like he believed and followed and was a part of the way that I thought politically in terms of social justice and race and racism, democratic, I guess, if you will, beliefs. He made it seem like that was what he thought too. And then he completely became diametrically opposed to all of those afterwards. Would I have loved to have known that beforehand? Yeah, but we were rushing through things so damn fast, I didn't. Another thing that will protect you from getting into a relationship with a toxic or narcissistic person is not having a scarcity mindset. And that is something I realize in hindsight I really had. One thing that narcissists will do is they will make you feel like you are so loved and you're so the center of their world and you're so much everything important to them. You're the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, the best sex they've ever had, the most, they just pour it on so thick. And then on top of whatever else love bombing they're doing, like for me, the big trigger one that really got me like, oh my gosh, he really cares about me, was him telling me he was going to take care of me and my sons from my first marriage, that I wouldn't have to worry about it, that we were always going to be taken care of by him. And that like really especially me coming from someone who doesn't have I don't have any really close family at all, and no one I can rely on or lean on like that. So at that time I felt very alone. I was divorcing. I have 2 small kids. I mean, I was sharing them with my ex, but still I felt very alone in the world. So when he said that, it was like, oh my God. But the way that becomes a huge problem is that oftentimes narcissists will then later threaten the relationship to keep you completely on edge. And he threatened the relationship actually pretty early on. And because I had a scarcity mindset, the scarcity mindset was no one else will ever love me like he's loving me. No one else will ever see me the way he sees me as so precious and so beautiful and so wonderful. No one else will ever want to take care of me and my kids the way he's promising to take care of me and my kids, which by the way was in a lot of ways a lie. But anyway, because of that, I had a huge scarcity mindset. So I was so afraid to lose him, which, if you know, that puts you in a position, especially if you're with someone who is psychopathic, someone who's narcissistic, someone who has evil intent. They can do a lot of stuff to you after that point, after you're willing to put up with anything, take anything, do anything, because you are so concerned and so worried about losing them, thinking that'll never happen again. You know, nowadays, so that was in the year 2015. 2015 and 2016 when all of this got started for us. Nowadays, if somebody started threatening me, well, if you don't do this or you don't do that, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to walk out of your life because of this or that, if it's something that's not reasonable and it's clear it's a threat, now I would be like, because you said that, we need to not be in each other's life. Like, one thing you not finna do is you not finna threaten me, especially threaten me with the relationship. And I know how that goes too, because with the narcissist and with my narcissist, it was very true. Like, the whole time we were married, he constantly threatened the marriage, and he did it at my most vulnerable moments, at my most vulnerable, scared, sad, hard moments. If you don't do this, I'm gonna leave you. That's like while I was pregnant and stuff, no job, scared, penniless. It's a really sad, hard thing to deal with when someone's telling you one morning they love you, and the next, if you don't get your shit together, they're going to leave you high and dry, pregnant with their child, So those kind of threats just carry over. But now I would never let someone threaten me with their presence. If they want to leave, you are free to go. It's a free country. And as a matter of fact, I want you to. I do not want anyone anymore who would ever do that. So it's a mindset now that protects me that I didn't have back then. And before I got with my narcissistically abusive ex, that wasn't even a thought in my mind, because I just thought, well, someone wouldn't leave unless they just didn't love me anymore. I guess I had this preconceived notions about what that is. But what I needed to have, and what you need to have to protect yourself from a narcissist, is a mindset that if someone is threatening to leave you, they are usually manipulating you, and let them go. And my ex, he did that within, I think, 3 weeks actually of us knowing each other. Within 3 weeks, we were already a couple. We'd already told each other we loved each other. And he already told me if I didn't do this and do that and do this, that he was going to leave. Man, I'm out. I'm going to be out. I'm going to be out. I'll never forget the first time he said that. I was crying hysterically. And I actually said to him, no. Oh my gosh, no, don't leave. No, don't leave. If you watch the previous season of Love is Blind, the one with Colleen and Matt, there's a scene, if you want to see an example of this, there's a scene when they're in Mexico on their little, couples vacation where they're all in Mexico. Matt is mad at her for something she did, and he's telling her she's going to leave. He's threatening the relationship, and she's following around behind him going, no, please, Matt, no. That scene was so triggering, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I used to do. I used to do that. Like, I totally used to do that. So many times throughout our marriage, following him around, crying, begging him not to leave every time he said he was going to leave, or every time he said he was going to walk out the door, because he knew that gave him so much power, and he knew it put me in such a vulnerable place. It was so sad. So if you never want to get into that dynamic, have a sense of like what your standards are about those kinds of behaviors beforehand. I think I'm actually just going to wrap this episode up here. So I'm going to do something a little weird, because I'm kind of out of time and I'd rather get this episode up. So I'm going to wrap it up with just this one segment. I hope it was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me at grace@outheretryingtosurvive.com. If this podcast episode is helpful to you, please share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, like it, it and subscribe on YouTube. Leave me a comment, share the YouTube video. I'm really trying to get this podcast launched into the world, and you guys can really help me by just sharing, and it's free 99. Another thing you can do is I am also now offering podcast subscriptions for those of you who want a shout out, a thank you email from me, and maybe some other perks. If there's a perk that you want, so become a subscriber and you can be in my podcast inner circle. And as I develop and roll out what this is going to look like, just know it's going to be juicy. So this is another way that you can help this podcast grow, because I would really like to spend more time doing it. Thank you again so much for being a part today, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.